Hey everyone, welcome to another video. If you're new here, hi, my name is Irit. I'm an artist based in Austria in Europe, and on my channel I share my art adventures. Today I am reviewing, telling you all the things about Daniel Smith Gouache paint, which is new to them. So if you're interested in seeing that, keep on watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. I would love for you to subscribe. Let me know in the comments if you've tried these and what do you think about them. Are you new to gouache, or you know the medium, like it, don't know it? I would love to know. You can find in the description of the video all of the information, the products that I'm using, including my printables, which I'm using in this video, and the supplies and the colors that I've got, and timestamps. Everything will be listed below. I'm going to swatch them, mix them, paint with them, and tell you everything I think about these so far. Let me start by reading to you what Daniel Smith says about their paints. Daniel Smith Extra Fine Gouache is a professional artist-grade water media that produces an opaque matte finish. Made with the same high-quality pigments and gum arabic as Daniel Smith Extra Fine watercolors, gouache is uniquely formulated with higher pigment loads to achieve density and opacity without adding whites or other fillers. Whether your painting style is abstract, representational, illustrative, or figurative, you'll enjoy the creative versatility of gouache. Apply it as mass tone straight from the tube, or get rich, full-bodied solids with single brush strokes. Temper colors smoothly with water to create softer lines and hazy layers. Mix and blend new shades to customize your palette. You can even scrape into it or build up light texture with mark-making tools. Use gouache to accent your watercolor paintings with velvety shadows or bold pops of color. Try it with a wider variety of brushes on either light or dark surfaces. Explore a whole new world of artistic expression. 22 richly saturated colors, 17 are single pigments, exceptional light fastness and pure natural opacity, full range of staining and lifting qualities, rewets, dilutes and cleans up easily with water, available in 15 milliliter tubes. Add colors to empty half pans for portability. So this is what Daniel Smith says, and for me personally, as a predominantly watercolor artist, I think these work really, really well in those final stages of a painting where you can add more kind of opaque pops of color or accents. And that's how I'm going to probably try incorporate these into my regular process. So let's get into the swatches and the colors that I chose to go with. I went with buff titanium. I want to say I have already white in my collection, so I didn't want to buy the Daniel Smith white. You can absolutely, mix and match these with other gouache paints. And then I got the Hansa yellow medium. This is for me a good primary yellow. I tend to like my yellows on the warmer red orangey side. I got Pyroll Scarlet, which is a very, very intense kind of red color. It's very nice. Not a color I use a lot, but you will see as is straight from the tube, but you will see also the tones that you can get with this when you mix it with white, and it creates some really nice shades. As you saw, these come out of the tube really nicely. I would say better than sometimes watercolors do. Watercolors, many times, they have some gum arabic coming with them. These were very smooth. There was no extra goo coming out, and they were very easy to work with. They really don't have that gooiness that watercolors have when they are straight from the tube. I personally prefer to use reconstituted, re-wetted watercolors. That's just my personal preference. I tend to be heavy-handed, and so I prefer to let them dry first. But these I didn't feel were super challenging to use straight from the tube. And in general, with gouache, I do feel like this paint really kind of shines when you use it on the more opaque side. So I mostly added just enough water to get the right consistency so it moves a little bit better. It's not too dry and I'm not struggling too much to spread it on the paper. The next color I got is Quin Magenta. This is a must-have for me. This is my primary pink or red. I could definitely live without the Pyroll Scarlet, but I could never paint without a pink. Wisteria is a color, I just wanted to get it. I was actually curious about it, but I definitely think this would be one of the first ones I would kind of drop from this selection if you wanted a more versatile paint, like a more versatile color palette, because with the nature of gouache and how you use them, it is very, very common to use white to create different shades and lighten your colors. And so Wisteria is very, very similar to just you adding white to the magenta and maybe with a touch of the ultramarine blue. So it's really a convenience color. And I would say unless you really enjoy that particular tone of color, which I personally actually do, I love those kinds of violets, I would skip that one. Then we have ultramarine blue. That's for me my go-to blue. I don't feel the need to have other blues in my palette. I considered getting lavender, which Daniel Smith also offers, just because I love lavender, but decided to be a bit more frugal this time. The next color I was super curious about, and that one is Cascade Green. It's actually from the current selection that Daniel Smith offers in their gouache range. I didn't really see any other green that I was interested in, and Cascade Green is one of my favorite greens in their watercolor range, so I was very curious to try it in gouache, and I wasn't disappointed. It's really lovely. It still has that granulation, which is not really a quality that I feel is much kind of talked about or shown or highlighted when it comes to gouache, but it still has that typical separation, and I think it definitely adds something. I personally love granulating watercolors. So for me, it was a great choice for a green. But if you prefer like smooth colors, then you might want to try one of their other greens. And then the last color that I got, just because I felt I needed some sort of darker color that also might be used to like neutralize my colors, I got the burnt umber, but honestly, it's not my favorite, and I would probably choose to neutralize my colors with their complements as opposed to like a dark brown. However, it does create really lovely shades when you add white to it, which you will see. So what I'm going to do next, again using one of my printables, which you can find on my website, is I'm going to add white to all of my colors, and I wanted to show you what kind of shades you get. So this is a bit different than how most people use watercolors. I actually have a white in my watercolor palette, but I admit I don't use it a ton. Usually if I want to add some sort of like a dusty, lighter, even pastel-y note to my paints, I usually add something like buff titanium or Naples yellow, but that's just me. However, traditionally, you will hear a lot of people say that, you know, with watercolors, the white is your paper and you can dilute the color using water. With gouache, however, it is very, very common to add white to lighten your kind of saturated colors. So I wanted to explore that, and it's definitely a great thing to do. And you can see the different shades. So let's get a little bit into the specific of the colors that I chose and what I think about them, and if I think they're a nice color choice. The Hansa Yellow Medium is really, really nice. It creates my kind of yellows when you add a lot of white to it. And for me, it could be also a substitute to Naples yellow, because it really becomes this lovely shade when you add white to it. Now, the Pyroll Scarlet is a great color for making kind of peachy pinks. So once, you know, you add white to red, you're going to get pinks. And I actually really like all the shades that you get once you start adding white. So this color for me, I think, is a great choice. I probably wouldn't use it straight out of the tube, but for florals, I think it's great. The Quin Magenta, of course, that's my color. I'm very particular with pinks. If you've watched this channel before, you know that I really like them bright. And this, for me, it could be brighter, but as like a primary magenta color, it's a good choice. It's intense straight out of the tube, but then when you add white to it, you get really beautiful shades of kind of like a bluish pink. So really lovely choice. And the Wisteria, you can see it's, especially compared to the shades you get from the Quin Magenta, it's a lot bluer. And when you add white to it, you really get those kind of soft, I don't know, I guess violet colors. It's not lavender yet. It's definitely more purpley, but it's definitely also my kind of purple. I'm also very particular with purples, and I don't like it when they are too blue. And the shades that I got with the Wisteria, they're really nice. You could probably play around with the Ultramarine and the Magenta and then add white and get similar results. But if you, like me, really like that area of the color wheel, all those violets, then I think the Wisteria is a good choice as a convenience color. Now with the Ultramarine, I do like all the different shades that I got when I added white to it. It's lovely. I could probably go a little bit more reddish with my Ultramarine. I wouldn't hate that, but it really is lovely kind of across the range. And then with the Cascade Green, I didn't really know what I was going to get. And I guess because of the phthalo blue that is included in this color, it's made out of a brown and a blue, and the blue is phthalo blue. It really leans kind of teal, turquoisey when you start adding white. So you don't really get greens, you get kind of ashy, slightly ashy, minty teals. Probably if you wanted to get more vibrant minty colors, I would add a little bit of yellow to this and then add white, or I would consider getting some of the kind of cooler, you know, like a lemon yellow kind of color from their range. I don't know exactly what's the entire color range, but those would probably be hard to mix from the colors that I chose, like really vibrant turquoises. So moving on to the burnt umber, straight from the tube, I don't like it, but once you start adding white to it, even very little, it kind of intensifies the opacity of it. But even when it's quite dark, you see now, the swatch that I'm doing now, those are really nice shades of brown. I don't use a lot of brown in my paintings, but I definitely like those kind of mocha, kind of milk chocolate colors that it gives me when I add a lot of white to it. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start mixing the colors. And again, I highly recommend that you do this with your colors, especially if you're working with a limited palette. It's really invaluable information to know what your colors can do. And especially for me, you know, only having 8 colors, and actually I didn't really play with the buff titanium. Probably should have done that and also mixed some of the colors with that color. Maybe I'll do that in a future video. But yeah, it just shows you the range. So when I mix the Hansa yellow medium with the magenta, it gives me a nice range of oranges and also reds you can get. You know, if you add a little bit of yellow, you can get a nice red. And then when you add white to all of them, again, you get really nice shades of pastels. I think for me, this is actually a quite well-rounded palette. I use a lot of yellows, peaches, corals, and pinks, lots of pinks in my paintings. And while I do wish again that the magenta was a little bit brighter, I enjoyed painting also florals with this selection. Now, speaking of, I'm just going to mention it briefly here, other gouache paints. I've played around with several brands. I do think the Daniel Smith formulation is really, really nice. I have to see how it dries over time. Many gouache paints tend to dry very, very crumbly. Now, to their defense, gouache is usually not supposed to be used like re-wetted. Most people that use gouache use it straight from the tube. However, you can absolutely re-wet it, and it works well with many of the colors. But if you don't use it often, then sometimes they will kind of get really crumbly or fall off the palette. So just be aware of that. It doesn't really affect how they perform. You can still re-wet them. But yeah, I do think that if you're going to paint with gouache, it's probably most enjoyable and most effective when used freshly squeezed. So let's move on to the mixtures of Hansa Yellow and Ultramarine Blue. This really gives me a great range of kind of earthy greens, and that's where I like my greens to be. I don't really like those kind of spring greens, those bright greens. It's just not my personal taste. And because of the warm yellow and also the warm blue, they both lean red. The greens that I'm getting are very, very natural looking, and I really like that. Because of the granulation in the ultramarine, you can still see it in some of the mixtures. I would say that, maybe the Cascade green, it's a nice color, but yeah, the range that I got here was really, really nice. And especially when you start adding the white, you can really get a lot of different tones. So it's a good selection of colors for greens. Let's move on to Quin Magenta and Ultramarine Blue. When you mix these two, first of all, the granulation from the ultramarine shows, which I always enjoy that effect, but just be mindful of that. If you don't like granulation, then you should probably choose another blue, not ultramarine. Really, really nice purples, especially once you start adding white to them. And because ultramarine is kind of a reddish blue and magenta is, I would say this one is pretty neutral, but it's not a red. It doesn't lean yellow. The purples that you get are very, very pure. If you wanted to kind of create slightly more muted purples, you would have to add another color to this. But you could get quite nice muted purples if you mix the magenta with the Cascade green. If you add just a little bit of that, it really kind of, because they are complementary, it creates these muted violets, which you'll see next in the video. So I think between these three, the Hansa Yellow Medium, Quin Magenta, and the Ultramarine Blue, you get a lot of variation, and that to me would be a great triad. If I wanted to try this personally, I wouldn't get the primary mixing set that Daniel Smith offers. That one has Pyroll red in it, and you just basically eliminate every pink and kind of cleaner purples from your palette, whereas if you choose your triad with the Quin Magenta, you get all those magenta colors, and you can still get red. You just need to add a little bit of yellow. So I don't know why they make these primary sets like so many times just with a red, but yeah. Now is another fun mixture was mixing the Ultramarine Blue with the Pyroll Scarlet. Now here you can also get very, very muted purples. They don't really neutralize each other, but they're quite close because the Pyroll Scarlet is you know, it's not really an orange, but it's almost there. It's a very kind of orangey red. So you don't really get a neutral color, but you get very, very muted colors that are really lovely. Again, the granulation shines through. So if you do like those more kind of muted purples and kind of like those brick colors, you can get that with these two colors. And once you start adding white, again, you get really nice shades. For me, the appeal of this particular mix is when you start adding white to it, but that's just my personal preference. So next I'm going to be mixing the magenta and Cascade green. And these two, as I said, they are pretty complementary. So they both kind of lean blue, so they don't completely neutralize each other. But again, like the previous mixture, you can get very lovely muted shades. So the ones that I particularly like is actually on the edges of that mix. I like this kind of deep, almost like a mauve color that I got when I just added a touch of green to the magenta. That one was really pretty. It would be beautiful in florals. To me, it almost has like a little bit more depth to the kind of mauvey colors that I got when I mixed the magenta with the blue. So this is definitely a color combination that I would use when I would paint florals. And for example, I would use these kind of mauvey colors to make the centers of my florals or maybe shaded areas in a flower. And then when you add a little bit of the magenta to the Cascade green, you kind of darken it, and it looks grayer because of that neutralizing effect, and you can get kind of more muted bluish greens. So these are not colors that I use a lot, but they are interesting, and I think a lot of people would enjoy that. So you can see that on the screen. There's close-ups at the beginning of the video, and I'll try to remember to put them again at the end of the video, so you can see exactly what you get. I wanted to show you kind of, you know, a lot of what these colors can do. I didn't mix every single shade with every other single shade, and I definitely neglected the BAF titanium, a mental note to myself, but I wanted to show you kind of the variety. And I like to have all the colors. I'm guilty of that, but it's very, very easy to get a nice range with these. So next mixture that I was curious to see are really complementary colors. We have the Pyroll Scarlet and Cascade green, red and green, opposite each other on the color wheel, and these really neutralize each other. You can get a good gray somewhere in the middle. And yeah, you know, looking at these colors, they're not exactly my cup of tea, but I do think they would probably appeal to a lot of people. Again, especially when you start adding those whites. And then the last mixture that I created was the Hansa Yellow Medium and Wisteria. And that one is also for me a very useful reference to have because, as I said, I paint a lot of florals and I really love using yellows, pinks, and violets as my main colors. But looking at it now, it also reminds me how much I enjoy painting seascapes. And I don't necessarily paint the sand yellow. Many times I like to kind of create a mixture from Naples yellow and cobalt violet, and that gives me kind of like a muted salmon color, and especially with cobalt violet, it has those violet granulations, which you don't get here. But I just really enjoy playing with those colors, with these kind of peachy, somewhat muted colors for the sand. And you get a nice variety of those colors when you mix these two. So I swatched everything, I mixed everything, I got to know the colors and a little bit the formulation, and now it's time to paint with these. And I had fun painting with them. I find the formulation of the paint itself is very easy to work with. Again, I tend to be heavy-handed, and that's why I don't like to work with freshly squeezed watercolors, but I didn't find it as challenging to work with these. Yes, you know, it's easy to pick up a lot of product, but that's usually why I like to paint actually with a smaller brush. Just it helps me to control the amounts of paint. But you can see the color is very, very smooth. It is very opaque. Of course, the more water you add, the less opaque it would be. But for me personally, the real appeal of gouache is when they are thicker, when they are more opaque. I find from my personal experience that the more I tend to kind of add water and treat them as watercolors, they kind of lose their vibrancy, I think because of their formulation, because they are supposed to be this opaque matte paint. So they don't have that luminosity that watercolors have when you start adding water to them, because they're not supposed to behave like that. And you can see here again, when you start playing with water, some of the colors kind of push themselves into other colors. Some are more bossy than others, and I enjoy that effect to some degree. But you know, probably if you want a bit more control, then you just need to use less water and kind of control your brush strokes. But I really enjoy this color selection. If they expand their colors, I might get a few more. Again, for me, I probably would most enjoy using these in top layers in my watercolor paintings, and not necessarily with just like 100% gouache painting. But they are very, very fun. Now, I was trying to think also how to describe the difference between these and watercolors, and you can feel that the formulation is different. Really, these are meant to be used, I would say, with more opacity and more product than most people tend to use watercolors. So yeah, I had fun playing with them. I think time will tell to see if I incorporate them more into my routine. Also thinking about these compared to other brands that I've tried. I've mostly painted with Winsor & Newton, a little bit with Holbein, and a lot actually with the Arteza set, which I enjoy. It has a lot of pretty colors, and I also painted a lot with it with my kids. I kind of use it the same way I use watercolors. I really, really like the pinks that Winsor & Newton have. They have a really lovely shade of range of bright pinks. I have to revisit my collection to see exactly which ones are my favorite, but definitely Daniel Smith is still lacking in that. But it is a new product. They've only started with a basic range, and my guess is if this line is successful, they will be adding more colors. So I look forward to that. Daniel Smith has some of my all-time favorite watercolors, and it would be fun to also have some of my favorite shades in gouache form. Enjoy also that granulation that Daniel Smith is so famous for. So I'm looking forward to see how these play with my other watercolors and art supplies. And as I'm recording and editing this video, it's already been 2 days since I filmed it, and every day I try and re-wet the paint and see how it performs, and so far it's looking really great. It's very, very easy to re-wet. I'll have to see how it looks after a week or a month, but if you're going to use it often, you can definitely squeeze some out into a pan and add it to your regular watercolors because it does re-wet beautifully, at least after 2 days. So the air in my house is very dry because we have heating on. It's winter. So far, so good. For me, that's a big, big plus, because if it was hard to re-wet, then it probably wouldn't be a supply for me. But seems like the formulation is good with that. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, opinions, your own review of these, please leave it below, and I'll see you in another video soon.